You're live.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to the House Environment Committee. This afternoon, we're going to continue talking about H86. Oh, go back. H86, the chloride contamination reduction program bill that we were looking at last week. And I want to welcome the folks from New Hampshire who are joining us by Zoom. And we really appreciate your joining us and testifying again. We know you testified on the Senate side, but here we are doing our due diligence on the House side and would love to learn more about your program over in New Hampshire. And so two of you are in the Zoom room. I don't know if you have coordinated with each other or who would like to go first?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and kick us off. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you. Yes.
Excellent, thanks. Well, it's pretty fantastic to be here with you all there in Vermont. I spend a fair bit of time with our legislators here in New Hampshire, and it's one of the best parts of my job is getting to educate people about the great work that we do at New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. My name is Ted Deers. I'm the assistant director for the water programs at DES. So I basically am in charge of operations for everything related to water. So all of if it's water, it's me. And so one of our many programs is our non-point source program, and the Green Snow Pro fits within that. I'm just going to give just a really couple of words about the background, and then I'm going to let Aubrey, who's our salt reduction coordinator, take over and tell you about the specifics of the program. Then I'll come back and talk a little bit more about sort of our experience living with the limited liability relief provisions, just mention a few things about that, and then really just open it up to you all for questions. We did send a letter that describes the program, a testimony letter. I hope you have received that. And that talks a little bit about background and about some of our lessons learned. And so that may be helpful for you as well. And then the last thing that just to say as preface before we jump in is that the state of New Hampshire takes no position on state of Vermont bills. That is it's not our practice. It's not our business. And well, my bosses know I'm talking to you. We are not authorized to take any positions. So what happens on the other side of the Connecticut stays on the other side of the Connecticut, I guess.
Fair enough. We appreciate that.
So with that, I'll just jump in. Our story starts about 20 years ago in the southern part of the state. We have Interstate 93, and I apologize. I do have some contractors in today, so there's a little bit of noise back in the background. About 20 years ago, they began the work of expanding Interstate 93 between Manchester and the Massachusetts line. As you can probably understand, that part of the state is our most highly developed part of the state, and it's certainly an economic engine. And they took, if you haven't been down that way, over the past 15 years, they've taken the 2 barrels each way to 4 barrels each way. So basically double size of the highway from Manchester south. Along with that, generated a lot more pavement, parking lots, all that sort of thing. EPA began looking at some water quality in that area, identified some challenges potentially with chloride, looked more in depth, and we ended up actually developing total maximum daily loads, which is if you're not familiar with that, it's a way basically of understanding a kind of a pollution diet. How much are you over a standard, and what do you need to do to get under that standard? So we wrote those for the chlorides in that area, and that set us off on this grand adventure. Turns out that DOT was a very minor player in the chloride problem. We identified that over 50% are related to other sources, primarily the private sector. So at that point, we basically stole Minnesota's program that they were doing out there to do training, and relabeled it. And we started doing voluntary training. But what we heard over and over again from the contractors is that this liability issue is a real one, and that basically they were worried. And I'll come back to this, I think, after Aubrey speaks about the program. But what they were really worried about was this perception, and perception may or may not be reality when it comes to these sorts of cases, is that if they were to reduce their salt, does that make them more open to slip and fall cases? Does it somehow say to the court that I was negligent because I used less salt. And I think that, as you've probably become aware, maybe through the conversations that you've already had on this bill, is that in general, most of the salt that goes down is not used correctly. About 30 to 50% more salt is used than actually needed to treat the roads. So the whole point of this program was to be able to educate people to use the right amount of salt, right place, right time, and thereby you have a vast reduction in the amount of salt used in the environment. So they were worried that by using less salt, even if they were achieving the same or better results, that they would somehow open themselves up to liability. And that's where these liability provisions came in. It took us several sessions to pass that bill. Ultimately, we had some champions within the Senate and the House who helped get that over the finish line. And now the program has been essentially more or less kind of like it is for about 10 years or so. We've had some tweaks along the way. If you've looked at our legislative history on this, you'll see that we have gone back and forth and done a number of different upgrades, fixed some loopholes, identified some things that were wrong. And I will just say that our legislature, while it was a little bit reticent 10 years ago to get this sort of on the books, it is a very popular program. It has, very big support from both sides of the aisles. Every time that we have been anytime we've needed to change the statute, it's really been a very easy process. They have recognized the importance of the program. And so there is really, truly no controversy about this program today. But we can talk a little bit more about sort of how we've lived with the liability provisions and the recent challenges that have been made to those. And that may also help to inform some of your conversation. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Aubrey to spend a few minutes talking about how the program actually works, from sort of the how we run the program to its experience with the people who are in it, and what it takes to be a Green Snow Pro in New Hampshire. So unless there's questions, I'm happy to interrupt whatever, just jump in. If you have any questions at this point, I'm happy to respond.
Representative Austin
Yeah.
has a question.
Thank you for being here. I'm just wondering about litigation. Have there been a lot of suits that have been brought against the drivers? And of those suits, have they been found in fault?
So this is a great question. Let's just jump in. This is the meat. So thank you, Representative. I appreciate that.
Okay, it sounds like it's probably going to be answered later on.
Yeah, we can stick to the run of show the way you all imagined it, and then we'll get back to those questions.
That sounds great. Don't forget that question. We'll come right back to that. That's an important one. And we'll start with that right after Aubrey kind of lays out the program for you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Ted. And thank all of you for having us here today. We love talking about this program. I'm Aubrey Velker. I'm our Green Snow Pro coordinator. So I kind of manage the day-to-day with running the certification program, kind of all the behind the scenes admin stuff. But kind of, to lay out, how does someone become Green Snow Pro certified? To start specifically for our commercial Green Snow Pro program, I'll kind of get into the municipal program a little later since that was just approved May of 2024, so that's brand new. But for a commercial applicator to get into the program, there's two primary things that they need to do to get certified. The first one is to complete approved training, so approved coursework and pass an exam. We have lots of different options for completing this coursework. We have some online options as well as in-person. Especially in the beginning, we primarily worked with the University of New Hampshire Technology Transfer Center, and they've really helped us with growing a lot of the education for this program. And as soon as a person, does the coursework, passes their exam, they then need to submit an application and a fee to us at NHDES, which then it comes to me, I process, make sure they've hit all the requirements for certification, they get issued their Green Snow Pro certificate. Now they need to maintain this certification each year. It is an annual certification, which means they have to submit an application every year along with their annual salt use report that, kind of lays out what they've used, what kind of material they've used, which towns and cities they've applied in, to kind of have our own information. They also have to do continuing education. So it's not just a do one-time coursework and you're good. They have to take coursework every 2 years. Again, we have a lot of different options for these. We have a lot of different training partners who provide that education and training for us. That gets approved through our department as well. But they do need to maintain that training. And a lot of this coursework, especially as we've kind of seen it evolve over the years, this is one of the things a lot of our applicators who have been part of this program for many, many years, even since the beginning, have said they've really appreciated. They've appreciated being able to get to learn a lot of different topics and really getting to collaborate with each other, learn from each other, learn what best management practices work best, different hurdles they've overcome, what worked, what hasn't worked, especially with, winters being a little wonky these past couple of years, trying to figure out what works best. So they need to make sure they maintain, their certification each year, especially for that limited liability coverage. Along with that, there is additional record keeping they need to maintain to be eligible for that limited liability. Within our RSA, it says they need to maintain a bunch of different records, including, their application rates, the weather, the time that they were applying and where they were applying, a whole list of them that, makes it so that they actually maintain that limited liability protection, which Ted will talk a bit more about after this. And we've seen a huge growth within this program. Back in like 2013, right before that limited liability component got passed, we only had 35 certificate holders. This current winter season, kind of 2024 into 2025, we have over 700 Green Snow Pro certified applicators, and that's from 175 companies. So we've seen huge growth within this program, which is great to see. We hope to continue seeing it grow as well. And then this past May of 2024, I guess it's almost a year later already, already April, we were able to adopt the administrative rules for our municipal Green Snow Pro program. So this allows us to recognize municipalities, so the cities and towns, in their efforts to implement salt reduction best management practices. So we're really excited to see that grow this kind of next winter season to bring them into that. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, or otherwise, Ted, I will pass over to you to kind of go a little bit more into that limited liability and how we've seen some of those court cases play out over the years.
Thank you for that. Yeah, questions on the actual program and how it works. Representative Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Aubrey or Ted, can you speak to the cost of the program? I assume this is state sponsored or state put on. Is there a cost for the online course, et cetera?
Yes, that is a great question. I apologize I didn't mention that earlier. So there are some costs to this program. So there is a training cost, and those training costs are set by our course providers. So whether they go through the University of New Hampshire, they do the online course, which we partner with the Smart Belt Salt Council up in Canada. There is a fee to take those courses. Those fees, though, are set by those organizations, and all the training fees go to those organizations. The department does not receive any of those training fees. And then in addition to any of those training fees that they have to take, there is an application fee each year in order to apply and renew their certification. With how it's set up, for most companies, they're going to have one person that they have designated as their master certificate holder, usually kind of the person that's making sure everything's organized, running it all. That has an annual fee of $250. And then for the rest of their crew, which are usually subordinate certificate holders, those have an annual fee of $25 each. However, we only charge for the first 4, so it's a max cap of $100 for that subordinate fee. So generally, for most companies that have, 5+ people in their crew getting certified, it's usually about $350 annually. Some companies might decide to have, additional master certificate holders, depending how they have everything set up. but generally about $350 for the annual fee that comes to us at the department. For our municipal Green Snow Pro program, that has an annual fee of $450. And that's for all municipalities, no matter what their size is or how many people they have.
Thank you.
So.
From the
what's-
purely bureaucratic, just sorry to jump in, just from the purely bureaucratic side of like how much does it cost to run the program? We have Aubrey's about a 3/4 FTE. So she's part-time, which we're trying desperately to try to get her to full-time. And we also have other staff who pitch in from time to time. So, I would say that really it gets very, very busy at times when people are trying to renew. It gets busy when we have FOIA requests, right to know requests regarding lawsuits. And I'll start talking about that in a second. And it gets, busy around when we're trying to do a lot of the outreach. And Aubrey does a fantastic job of Halloween notes to do outreach to Valentine's. She sent, salty Valentines to people to try to do outreach. So, it's been a really interesting and creative endeavor. And so the funding almost covers the position that we have. And then I said we have some other positions, and we're starting to look at expanding the role a little bit, given some of the chloride impacts and sodium impacts on our drinking water supplies around the state. So we're starting to look beyond the impacts on rivers and streams and lakes, and looking at some of the other water infrastructure we have, and that helps to diversify, I think, some of the funding for this. So I think that kind of covers the money side.
Thank you.
To clarify, though, the impetus for people to participate is, what is it?
I can start. Aubrey can jump in. She talks to
Go for it.
these folks all the time. There's really a number of different reasons why people come to us. First of all, there is in the industry itself. When we first started talking about this 20 years ago, this idea of reducing your salt use was pretty alien. Over the last 20 years, it has become more normalized. And so there's lots more, the manufacturers have begun doing a lot of interesting things. There's importers of equipment from Europe that are doing very interesting things. So there's a lot of people that are looking at this from a business side. How do I reduce costs? One of the interesting pieces of doing things like brine applications, if you're a contractor, is it means that you can apply the night before, which means that you might not have to get your guys out of bed at 3 a.m. For that storm. You might actually give them another hour of sleep, another 2 hours of sleep, because the salt's already working on the ground. And so, you have there's some really interesting economics around this for the contractors themselves. There are groups that simply want to be more green. And so that's an interesting, component. And there are some companies that have tried to differentiate themselves in the market in that way. And then there's a lot of people who really see this liability relief as an incentive to get involved, and because it extends to property owners. So there are some property owners who are also encouraging and sometimes requiring the people who they hire as contractors for their properties, their apartment buildings, their parking lots, for those folks to have gone through this training as well. So there's a number of reasons. And then, certainly from the municipal side, there's a lot of pressure from groups, environmental groups, especially lakes and rivers groups, for towns to do something about water quality. And this is something people can do. We hear from municipalities there's a big esprit de corps kind of element to all of this, and I think we've discovered that in our commercial side as well. So Aubrey, what do you add to that?
I think you covered it pretty well. Again, as Ted said, that limited liability is definitely a carrot for people to become Green Snow Pro certified. We are seeing more property owners actually or even require it. if they, are going to have somebody make a bid for one of the contracts for winter. And with the municipal side, even now, since the municipal Green Snow Pro rules have been approved recently, I get a lot of emails, phone calls from residents going, how can we get our town certified? They're using too much salt. We want to see them take action. So hopefully this is a way that, they can do that and really show that they are taking the steps to do that. Because doing a lot of the salt reduction, it takes time to implement a lot of these practices, and you get, your whole crew on board. Sometimes there's additional equipment needed. So it does take time to make that change. But being able to say, we have the certification, we're going through the training, we are taking these steps to hit those goals definitely helps.
And are you seeing salt levels go down in your surface waters?
Oh, that's
That's a
the
great
biggest
question.
In stereo.
It's it's a super hard question, and just to get into, just because both of us come at this from an environmental standpoint. If we can just get just a tiny little bit into the science, is that the chlorides we're putting down now in a lot of places are not going to be seen in the groundwater, not going to be seen in surface waters, in some cases for many, many years. So the water quality we see today is a reflection of the land use over the past decades. And that's because it takes a while for water to work through the ground. It gets set, it's in the ground, it has to be pushed through. What we see in a number of different places around the state is actually our highest chloride concentrations occur in the summer, not in the winter. And that's because of this latent effect of all of that drainage from the winter going into the ground and then slowly coming out, and then coming out at times when the stream flows are at the lowest. So this is part and parcel of the challenge. It's extremely tricky to track all of this stuff because every winter is different. If it's a really, really cold winter, sometimes you actually end up using less salt because you don't get the refreeze. If you have one of these winters where with storms like we've seen, where it goes back and forth right around 30 degrees, then you tend to use a lot of snow and a lot of ice. And then if you have these refreezes and really cold nights, you also seem to see a lot of salt use. So that's really hard to distinguish that noise out of water quality data, which also is affected by flows. It's affected by lots of other things. So identifying that is hard. It's a little bit easier to count salt than it is to count water quality. So we do know, and I think as Aubrey may have mentioned this, is that the companies that have, by you looking at their salt use reports, the companies that have been in the program the longest use the lowest amount of salt per acre. So that salt rate, what it appears is that the longer people do this, the better they get at it. They tend to use less salt. That has a benefit across the environment. Very, very tricky to track. We'll be tracking these are the kinds of things we'll be looking at for years and years and years. And then there are, like I mentioned, there's a couple of places where there's some drinking water wells that are affected. They're actually working on some management plans, watershed management plans, which will try to get at that. And that's a place in which there'll be a lot of monitoring. Finally, we do have a lot of anecdotal evidence of companies themselves cutting their salt use by 30, 40, 50%. So we know that it works. Actually measuring it in the environment is extremely difficult.
Do you measure it in the environment? Are you monitoring regularly?
We have a very, very active monitoring program around the state. We have 180 lakes that we have volunteer lakes monitoring on, and we have hundreds and hundreds of miles of rivers, as well as what our own team does. We do synoptic sampling around the state. So we have lots and lots of data, and we're, again, but even if you're out sampling 4, 5, 6 times a summer, and even places where we have data loggers that have been deployed, the long-term nature of this problem makes it a challenging science project.
Mm-hmm. Totally unrelated, but I meant to ask this the other day and I didn't, or maybe I was waiting to talk to you all, but back in the day when we had lead in the gasoline, there was talk of a layer of lead moving through our soils and getting into our groundwater. Has that come to fruition? Do you know? Sorry for the random question, but it seems related in that it's laying down a layer of kind of inorganic thing
Well,
that's going to move the soil.
I think that let me answer it this way: is that the lead that we see in water supplies is generally coming from pipes. This is the whole nature of the lead and copper rule that what EPA rolled out over the last couple of years, and it really has to. So the lead and most of the lead that people consume, it comes from the environment around them. Things like there may be some in the soil, and kids are playing in the soil, or paint that's flecking off of our old New England housing stock. That's where people are generally getting lead in. And in the water, it's generally coming from old lead pipes, again, old infrastructure, or places where there were faucets or things that had lead soldering or other things in them. That's where people are getting. But the linkage, though, and I think this is one of the things that is really important remember about chlorides, is that chlorides do leach those metals out of soil, and they also leach them out of pipes and into water supplies. So this idea of controlling chlorides for improving your water quality, it's not just because of the chlorides. It's not just because of the sodium and people with hypertension that shouldn't have high sodium in their diets. It also has this other byproduct of mobilizing heavy metals in particular.
Thank you. Other questions, members, on this? Representative Bartholomew.
I'm just curious what kind of feedback you get from the company about cost savings, if they're using less salt and perhaps fewer overtime hours. Are they reporting significant savings doing this?
So some of our companies that have been in the program, again, probably close to the beginning or, close to 10 years, a few of them, especially one company in particular I can think of who made a complete switch over to liquids. Slowly he had to do that, but I believe he's saved, what was the number? It was like over 50% in his salt usage, and I can't remember the number and how much that actually cost him financially, but he's definitely commented that he's had significant cost savings being able to just use less materials over the years and kind of learning how to do that. But I don't think we have any specific numbers from companies, but something we definitely want to look into more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would
just
say
don't-
that SIMA, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I just don't have a sense for a company that does this, how much of their budget is salt versus equipment, labor, all kinds of stuff like that. Maybe the salt's not a big part of their budget. I don't know.
It is a big part of the parts of their budget they can control. And I think that's the piece that's interesting from a business perspective, is that you have to get out there mechanically and push the snow around, right? So that takes a truck, and now you've got something that sits in the back of the truck. So if you can reduce the time it takes you to do the mechanical plowing, which is essentially what salt does, that lets you have it lets you have less people in the trucks. Quantifying that is challenging, but the things that you absolutely can control is how much of that material you're using. And if you can control that, and then you can get those other byproduct effects. But there are some really good studies that have been done by SIMA, which is the Snow and Ice Management Association. And they have some nice studies about some of the economics and how those have played out nationwide from some of their efforts. They have a what do they call it? Winter professional certification thing that they do.
Yeah, they have a few different ones there, but
All right, well, now let's go to Representative Pritchard.
Couple questions. Is there, in their achieving this reduction, is it with the existing equipment they have? Have they made improvements to their equipment to meet this, or is it simply the same equipment, just a better management practice?
can start. I would say it's a mix of both, and it really depends on the company and what they have available financially. A lot of the best management practices that are discussed during a lot of the coursework are a mix of both. So there's talk about just how to properly use the equipment you already have, how to properly calibrate it so you actually know your application rates, how to calculate your application rates, knowing just how salt works and when to put salt down, how much to put it down based on the different weather conditions. And then there's always education about, new technologies that they can use, whether that's brining equipment, GPS location. So it's definitely a mix of both and really depends on the company, what they're going to be able to do.
So you say calibration rates, so I'm assuming that there's a measurement system on these vehicles.
Typically.
Okay, so I know in our state, there's many commercial folks that don't have calibration. And I guess that's what I'm trying to, is it required to have this to make those improvements?
Calibration
Yes.
is one of the main ones in order to, cause then when you calibrate your equipment, then you can actually know what your equipment is outputting. So you can actually know what your application rates are. And to be able to reduce your salt, you need to know what your application rates currently are so that you can know what you're actually putting down on the ground each time you go out.
There's a great study out of the University of Waterloo up in Canada, up in Ontario, where they identified that basically if you just by calibrating, you can save 20 to 30% of your salt use, because you actually know how much you're using, you know what speed you're using, you know your application rates, and you know that you're not, overlapping. The technology is as advanced as you want to get. They have trucks that will track absolutely everything. They have weather tracking stuff. They have pavement temperature stuff. They have all kinds of other things that I was wondering about that. That they have all kinds of other things that will help to use less salt. The brining equipment, again, you can make your own brine. They have brining equipment for that. You can get into this as deep as you want to, but at the fundamental level, it's knowing your own equipment, knowing what it's putting out, and then there's a lot of tips about planning out your routes and making sure you're not overlapping, and there's some ground control. Even the most people now are moving to a ground control system, ground speed control system, so the speed actually controls the rate at which the salt comes out. These are all the kinds of things, and as equipment gets moved over and the industry changes, I think you see more and more of these elements on sort of standard equipment. I think, Aubrey, don't you think that's kind of what we see at the trade fairs and such?
Absolutely.
That was an important question for me to be answered, and the reason being, I mean, the way you talk, all these folks have this calibration equipment. Many of our municipalities don't have it. I don't know of any commercial guys in my area that have it. I know commercially or municipally to outfit a truck, it's about $15,000. I don't know what the cost would be involved for a commercial folk, person that sands or salts 25 or 30 folks' driveways. But to them, it would be a substantial cost. So it looks like the people in New Hampshire have assumed that cost by the way you talk, because you've been talking about calibration. Obviously, you have to have calibration equipment to control that. So
if you have a tarp, a big blue tarp, which I believe everybody in New Hampshire and New Hampshire and Vermont are supposed to have at all times. That's a requirement of living here. We have to have a blue tarp. If you have a blue tarp and a bucket, which you probably have, and a scale, we can go to wherever you want to go, and we will calibrate your equipment, no matter what your equipment is. That's the technology involved in calibration. And so you essentially drive over a known distance with whatever setting your spreader has on it. And from that, you basically gather up that salt, you put it in a bucket, you weigh it, and you do some math, and you can figure out exactly what your rates are. So it's really as rudimentary as that, of just informing people about some very, very basic stuff that most people don't think about. And that's been, I think, this idea of how do we draw people in and have them think about these things.
I'd like to go to Representative Austin's question. So
Just the liability and, which have been substantiated and what has been not substantiated?
Sure. So I bet certainly in New Hampshire, and I'm sure it's this case in Vermont, is that if you Google up slip and fall attorneys, you will get lots and lots and lots and lots of pages on Google. And so that is, that certainly is an industry in which there's lots of participation. So we certainly do get our fair share of slip and fall cases. And most of the time, one of two things happens. Either the insurance company looks at it and settles. We don't get to control that. They choose if they'd like to do that or not. And then and then the other path is that if people, and we hear this a lot, that people sort of, they start getting into the case, they show that they have good documentation, they show that they might be Green Snow Pro, they show that to things, and these cases just get withdrawn. That happens a lot also. Tracking that in the legal system is extremely difficult, but we do know that because we hear from our contractors what happens a lot. And that's one of the paths that goes down. One of the other issues that comes up a lot is that when somebody goes to try to use their limited liability relief provision, they have to prove that they've met all of the criteria. So all of those criteria, they have to have been, certified at the time. We have a lot of people who, they messed around, didn't get their certification paperwork in until December, and we had a storm in November, and guess when the accident was? Or they go in and start looking at the paperwork that they were required to keep. We don't get that paperwork. We never see that paperwork, but they're required to have it by law in case they want to utilize this provision. They present that, they start looking through it and realize that, hey, we have some gaps. We can't document well enough our practices on that particular day. This is why the training that we provide does a lot of work on documentation, because that's a really key aspect to all of this. So those are the primary paths in the past in which this has gone. We finally did have a case about a year and a half ago, in which we had a case that went all the way up through the court system. And so this was a company that is probably one of the most conscientious contractors that is in our program. They've been in for a long time. They do one of the things I'll just mention, that they do their own training. We have an authorized trainer program, which helps to reduce cost for employers. The cost of training. So I just wanted to mention that. That's sort of an aside, but it is part of one of the provisions of the law. And so we're able to, one of the things that we're able to do is to be able to, like I said, provide that training. So this particular company was sued. It was a slip and fall case. And the attorneys representing the insurance company and the attorneys representing the company looked at their documentation. They looked at it and they basically decided this is a slam dunk. We have done everything the law says. This law should basically require this case to be withdrawn. We were not negligent. We have very good documentation that we did everything, and that they're and we're going to take this case. So they took the case. They took it on. They went to a jury. The jury was unanimous in its decision that indeed they were not negligent, that they don't, and that the provision, the limited liability relief provision, actually should have blocked them from this lawsuit. The appeal was withdrawn, rejected, and then they basically, that was the end of the case. Did not go to our Supreme Court because essentially the case law and everything else, basically no attorney would bring it on appeal. So we do have that now that has shown. And so what we've been doing since then is we've been doing a fair bit of outreach to the Bar Association, New Hampshire Bar Association, and also to some of the judicial branch education opportunities for judges and such. So that so that's kind of the way that these provisions work. One of the things that I think is really important to remember in all of this is that we're not granting someone a special right. what we're saying with this provision is that simply using less salt should not open you up to any more risk from litigation than the person who uses more salt than they need to. That's what this provision does. And it's like the ski area. The ski area, if you go up there and you want to strap slick boards to the bottom of your feet and slide pell-mell down through the trees, you can't really sue there's a provision in the state law that says you can't really sue those people for negligence if they did everything that was in the industry standard to keep you safe. The lift was working well. They had padding around the big the poles. They had, they roped off the avalanche areas. They, all of those kinds of things were well marked. They kept you as safe as you could. It's very, very similar to that sort of thing. If you're negligent, you're still going to get sued. You're still going to pay. And if you don't have the good documentation to show that you're not negligent, then you still have a problem. All this basically does is it says it's okay. It's normal to use the right amount of salt at the right place at the right time and not have to worry about a lawsuit just because you were doing the right thing. That's the nature of this provision, and that's I think that gets lost in the shuffle a little bit.
Thank you. Representative Tagliavia.
I got a few questions. With regard to, you said there's a lot of record keeping that needs to be maintained to maintain your certification. But I don't think I heard that there was any kind of tracking of the number of lawsuits versus the number of lawsuits that were successful versus not because of the program. And how can you call it a success if you're not tracking the number of lawsuits that this has actually saved the certified professionals from? And with respect to the one lawsuit that you described about how it went all the way up through the courts, how much did that wind up still, because of the court cost, costing that particular contractor?
Those are all excellent questions. I don't think I have great answers. I don't know, Aubrey, do you know any of the costs that they incurred?
I do not know that answer.
Right. I mean, they would have incurred those costs regardless of the program. So I'm not sure that how you sort of document that in terms of numbers of cases. We have yet to find a way that allows us to, we don't have a provision in our state law that says you have to report to us if you've been sued. So that is absolutely the case. We have not figured out a good way to track those sorts of, torts related specifically to winter snow and ice issues. There is not a way to do that within the way our legal system keeps track of things. So again, most of the evidence, and I know this is pretty frustrating to hear if you're looking for evidence-based approaches, most of our evidence is anecdotal. And I would just say that what we see is a growing anecdotal evidence that people are being more successful in using these kinds of arguments in the cases when they do come up.
Do members have further questions for the New Hampshire team? Thank you so much for joining us. Really very
Absolutely.
helpful.
And if the committee has any questions later on, if you want to shoot us an email or whatever, we're happy to respond to that. Happy to come back and talk at any moment.
Great. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess next up is Kent Henderson.
Let them see our secret handshake.
No, better not.
If you don't mind, but please take a seat. I'll just put you. It's your slideshow right here. I'm gonna open that and make sure it's.
It's
You
on the
want the top one, right? Wonderful. That should show up right here. You are showing. I'm gonna. And that's slide up. Move this whole screen out of the way. Just trying to figure out how to open your slideshow.
Certifications. There you go. You got a lot. I have just first aid. It seems like
I'm looking for. If anyone sees it, please let me know.
What do you?
I'm just trying to start his slideshow.
Slideshow.
Sleeping in jail at night.
There's a slideshow. at the top.
There's a slideshow button at the top of notes.
Yeah, here,
That one.
this one. There we go.
He's so funny.
Now, slideshow. From beginning.
He wasn't.
There we go.
All right.
Just search it
If
here.
my wife was here, she would advise you to put it on a timer. It advances and keeps me going. That was her contribution at this stage.
So there's a short lag in between, but it's just this button and this button right here to get you next sleeve.
It just hit the page now.
I would do this one, the right button.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, thank you so much.
All right, welcome Kent Henderson.
Thank you very much. I feel very comfortable in this setting. Thank you so much for setting me up. This is just like my computer room, so we'll see if I can perform as good here as I did there. My name is Kent Henderson. I'm a retired dairy exclusive veterinarian and I live in the town of Georgia. I serve on the board of directors of the Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds. And I have presented before as the longtime chair of the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain. And I'm pleased to see that I recognize a lot of faces around this table from our appearance at the card room in the first week of the session. And many of you stopped by and visited Fog Lab at that time. The Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds is a statewide coalition of some 50 volunteer lake associations, plus many individual lake stewards. My testimony today follows the Fog Lab communication policy, which guides my comments, and that it has been approved by and supported by our chair, the Fog Lab chair, and executive committee. So I'm here to give evidence today that there is public interest and in chloride accumulation in water bodies in the state of Vermont, and that by speaking for Fog Lab, that we've got over 50 lake associations around the state that are getting this information. So today I want to testify that that Fog Lab approves and supports the passage of H86. And then to go on to say that with the passage of the Clean Water Acts in 2015 and 2019, that the Vermont legislature supported watershed organizations and lake associations in reducing phosphorus pollution from non-point source usage. And now our focus is being drawn to chloride pollution, which is receiving more attention from DEC more recently with added
sampling and tracking. A strong feature of FOBLAP is the research and education effort that we are putting into our Clean Water Project webinar series. In January, we presented our second webinar, which was how to assess your lake's water quality data, and that was presented by Mark Mitchell of Vermont DEC, who's the head of their lay monitoring program. Mark provided, and then I'm going to present to you today some tables and graphs that Mark prepared and showed to our organization that convinced us that there is chloride accumulation going into the state's waters, and it's time to take action to prevent it going any farther. So Mike provided these tables and graphs that sparked our interest. And another message that we received was that the state collected data set is actually extremely limited. But given the data that we have to date and what we're learning from our neighbors in New Hampshire, it makes sense to act now and to prevent the need for later costly remediation. Another source of information in my testimony was obtained from Kelly Merrill of DEC, who collects chloride samples in the spring. In this slide, and I know it's written really small and it's hard to see, but this data was collected last summer. And Mark Mitchell indicated to me that 0.2 is the megs per ml, which is on the, if you look on the y-axis, the bottom number is 2. So we're listening to a Lake Champlain Basin Program presentation from last month. We were informed at that time that 0.2 megs per L would be a baseline for the amount of chloride that would be expected to be in Vermont's lakes and ponds just from normal sources. So from the graph, you can see all these popular Vermont ponds and lakes that are carrying chloride levels that are higher, and it's due to road salt, road salt, dust suppression, water softeners, and other sources. The drinking water health standard for chloride is 250 milligrams per liter. And you see that doesn't even register on this graph. That would be way off the screen. This level was established by the EPA in 1988. So these data do not necessarily indicate health implications from chloride pollution, but there are health implications from consuming sodium. Sodium and chloride concentrations in water are often related, since sodium chloride is the most common type of road salt being used in the winter. EPA recommends that sodium in drinking water be less than 20 milligrams per liter. So on people that are on a restricted sodium diet. So the green line on the far right is for Shelburne Pond, and that one is at that 20 milligram per liter level. The drinking water standard, again, by EPA is 250 milligrams. From DEC's total chloride concentrations in Vermont's inland lakes, 2024 report, there are only 2 Vermont water bodies that exceeded that 250 level. DEC is raising concerns, though, that this is not an appropriate level of chloride that explains its effect on aquatic species, corrosive effect on highway structures, and private and public drinking water infrastructure. So FOBLAP is hoping that this level can be better defined in the future, that more work can be done on it.
Representative Austin?
Yeah, so the Winooski is a river, right, on the previous slide.
Yes.
So it must be going into Lake Champlain. Is that?
Yes. It does go into Lake Champlain.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Just,
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
I've looked and learned from these graphs, but I am not really the one to be the expert to interpret them, but I'm going to relay what I've been told as accurately as
Yeah.
possible.
thank you.
This box graph shows the range of chloride that's being detected by La Rosa Partnership volunteers. And I'm assuming the committee is familiar with that program that is supported by DEC, where volunteers from different watershed groups can collect from May to August. And they'll get one high flow event, and then there'll be several biweekly collections. So this graph is just to give the committee an idea of the magnitude of chloride from the tributaries in these watersheds that are contributing to lakes, ponds, and Lake Champlain. 4 years ago, the DEC Tactical Basin Planner requested my nonprofit, Friends of Northern Lake Champlain, to add chloride to our testing that we were doing on our La Rosa collection sites, in addition to nitrogen and phosphorus that we were already doing. And so our collections have been added to this. The collection that we do is the third one from the left, the Champlain Maquam Shore collection area there. And that is in the case of that collection area, I know where we collect that. We collect it right off a bridge. It's a road that goes along the lake, and it's about 200 feet from the lake. It's from an area that drains a 2,800 acre, mostly agricultural area in the Champlain Valley. And still you see the high levels of fluoride in there. About the only source can be that municipal road.
Representative Bartholomew.
I'm not sure how to interpret these boxes. Is this a concentrations over time? Like Maury, it's down near 0 and all the way up to 100. What does that mean?
The way I interpret them is that they take all the collections, and there's a range of what they find. So if you take Maury, probably the lowest collection rate that they would have found would have been like maybe a 5, a 4, or a 5, and they may have had one spike way up to 120.
Are these little black lines average or?
That would be a good question for a statistician.
Okay, all right.
I'm not going to overstep
Okay,
with what I say.
thank you.
Representative Sakowitz.
The horizontal lines within the boxes are typically the medians. And then the horizontal lines at the maximum and minimum parts of the boxes in the colored areas will be the 25% quartile and the 75% quartile at the top. So that would be how you would typically interpret this graph.
Thank you for that. I'll move on then. Further evidence on emerging fluoride pollution problem is provided in this table from a publicly accessible lay monitoring part of the DEC website that Mark Mitchell presented to FOVLAP participants. From this limited size of collections, from some of the really popular Vermont lakes, if you look on the right column, you'll see the arrows. And these are all indicating increasing amount of chloride that's being measured in these popular Vermont lakes. And the red marks are in lakes Carmi, Maury, Shelburne, and Tickle Naked. But all the way down through, there's an increasing number in those small number of the hundreds and hundreds of ponds and lakes in Vermont. This map is provided by Kelly Merrill from DEC, and it shows the extent of chloride samples from the spring in Vermont lakes and ponds. You'll see there are a lot of empty circles, and that indicates, these empty circles indicate that there's less than 5 years of data available. And unfortunately, the biggest number of circles are empty. So it's a demonstration that there's a strong case to do more testing. But the bigger circles mean that there has been more testing. The colors indicate how much increase is going on, and you'll see red ones and yellow ones. The red ones that have the most interest would be, again, Carmi, Caspian, Little, Memphremagog, Maury, Rescue, Shelburne, and Tickle Naked. So this is a plea from DEC to allow more testing so we can get more evidence as to what we're actually finding in these water bodies. This is my last graph, and what it attempts to show is the density of paved roads in a watershed plotted against the inland lake chloride levels, that is correlating to road salt. So the chloride level is measured in the adjacent water bodies on the y-axis, and it's plotted against the concentration of the paved roads on the x-axis. And the steepness of this line, the median line, demonstrates the strong contribution of road salt on paved roads to adjacent water bodies. This is supposed to demonstrate a correlation between the two. So,
Sakowitz.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would just point out that the y-axis is the logarithm of those numbers, and so it's actually the numbers are increasing very rapidly on, not linearly like they are on the x-axis. And so if you were to plot this out where it was all just linear, it would actually look a lot steeper than it does.
Thanks so much for this interpretation, because I'm learning a lot about this whole process. Just getting educated to get in front of you today. So this is great. Thank you so much. Okay, then to wrap up, chloride contamination in Vermont water bodies is an emerging problem. At its present stage, it could be managed with preventative measures like this voluntary certification program to avoid progressing to more expensive chloride removal efforts that have been experienced in Adirondack lakes. For my years as a veterinarian with clinical experience working with Vermont farm clients, they always subscribed to the theory that an ounce of prevention was much more effective than a pound of cure. Considering the investment that the state has made in curing the non-point source phosphorus problem, adoption of this voluntary certification program before chloride reaches the expensive removal phases would seem to be the preferred approach. In closing, I would like to reiterate that FOVLAF approves and supports the passage of H86. Without compromising public safety, this bill addresses the impacts of sodium chloride on infrastructure and water quality to reduce road salt application. In this bill, chloride accumulation in Vermont lakes and ponds will be reduced through the development of best management practices for municipality and commercial applicators, certification, reliability, protection, and expanded monitoring of water salinity levels. That concludes my remarks, and happy to go into questions.
Thank you. Thanks for your testimony, Representative Nord.
Yes, thank you very much for this information. I appreciate the data and the plots. It's very helpful. Do you have any ideas why there might be such a significant difference between the measurement levels shown on chart 3 versus chart 5? Seems like the chloride parts per million or milligram per liter are significantly higher on chart 5, box plot. Medians there are significantly higher than the measurements that are shown on the bar graph on chart 3.
I can't speak with certainty because I wasn't in charge of the collection process. I think that's where it would be good to maybe bring the authors before the committee and answer a question like that more specifically. I think a lot of it has to do with the time of year and where the collections are made. I know, like I mentioned with our La Rosa collections, there's one site where we tend to collect on one side of the bridge, upstream from the bridge, and the other place we go to, there's a lot easier access on the downside of the bridge. And I don't know what other, what other things are facing, so I don't know how really closely standardized these are. I'm just taking this information as a general order of magnitude explanation that there is a lot of chloride that's accumulating in our waterways.
Any questions? Thanks again for your testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Members, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Be back. See you further.